And Closer Look continues from WABE in Atlanta. As always, I'm Rose Scott. Their vision is clear: a South where liberation and justice for all disabled people is achievable. New Disabled South is still a relatively new organization, but their advocacy for disability justice has already led to increased funding for at-home care in Georgia and the start of a Disabled Voter Bill of Rights. Joining me now is Dom Kelly. He's the co-founder, president, and CEO of New Disabled South. Dom, welcome.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to talk with you today.
We met, about a month ago?
Yeah, that's right.
I told my producer, Daniel Rose, I didn't even know this organization existed. Let's talk about that, because obviously people have to be aware that you are around. But I imagine once this started, people started saying this was something that was definitely needed.
Yeah, we've heard that a lot. We exist because there has not been a regional strategy for disability rights and justice in this country. We're the first and only regional disability organization. I've been organizing in the South for a long time and recognize that there are so many issues that our community faces here in this region, so many through lines between what our folks face here in Georgia and other southern states. And there are a lot of great groups, a lot of great folks who do incredible work at the state level, local level, federal level, but a lot of silos. And so I wanted to figure out a way to bring those folks together. And so we do that through policy advocacy, organizing, original research, and it has just grown into something I never imagined when I had this idea 5 years ago and got us up and running 3 years ago.
And when you think that here we are in the 21st century with an organization like yours that's still relatively new, that there hasn't been a more of a collaborative effort to focus on those issues specific to this region.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with the underfunding of our movements, the reality that our society as a whole does not see disability or disabled people as disability as a normal human experience. That it's something that is usually associated with charity or with medicine and health, and there's so much more than that. And we're trying to bring a liberatory view to disability.
I want to talk about, Dom, the awareness, I guess, origin story for you. And you can share what you can that you feel comfortable with our listeners, but because there's always an origin story.
Right.
So as it relates to you personally, when did this awareness that, you know what, first of all, I'm not a charity case, number one. Number two, I just want equal access like everybody else.
Yeah. I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy when I was a year old. I'm a triplet, and my triplet brothers and I were all diagnosed. And my mom actually was a huge advocate for us and put us in front of a room full of high school seniors when we were 4 years old and essentially said, good luck, you're going to tell your story. And her thought was, I want you to know how to talk about your story before someone tries to tell it for you. And at a very young age, I just understood that people were going to see me and my brothers differently, and that I wanted to be able to show them who we were, that not only were we more than having cerebral palsy, we were actually proud of it. It was actually a part of who we were. And I think that has informed my work over the years, who I am as a person, and then really seeing the realities that multiply marginalized disabled folks face, especially in the South here. That radicalized me, politicized me more, that it really is more than excessive basic access. It's so much more than that.
And Dom, if your mother doesn't have that approach, what's your name, first name?
Her name was Vicky.
Vicky. If Vicky doesn't have that approach, and you could speculate about whether or not you would still continue down this path, but for parents who are listening and who might be in the same situation with their children, what do you want to say to them about what your mom did for you? And they may be doing it.
Yeah.
But what's your message to them? The importance of what she did.
Yeah. I think the most important thing that she did was not center herself. Oftentimes we see, especially with parent-led groups with the best intentions, it is often centered around their own experiences. I'm an autism mom, or whatever the label, right? And it's actually, no, your child's autistic, your child has a disability. Not centering yourself in the narrative. That is something that somehow my mom had the wherewithal to understand, that even, back in the 90s when that wasn't really a pervasive message or narrative.
I'm curious too, Dom. Do you have these conversations where you have to educate folks, or at least through your lens, say, look, when we talk about DEI that y'all want to dismantle, and now it's become three bad letters, often, the, even though there's a D in there, and it could and it should include disabled. I mean, people can say, well, that's a personal opinion, but that's what it's all about, right? So
Yep.
disabled folks, you feel like they've been left out of the conversation? Maybe not intentionally. I don't know. Overlooked could be a better word. But when we talk about all these years and years, or we talk about DEI, that sometimes, often, the disabled are not a part of that conversation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've seen the letters expand, like DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the Trump administration's executive orders, they actually say DEIA, so it specifies accessibility. But we have been left out, and sometimes intentionally. I do think that there's more of an awareness now of how disability fits into DEI, and also how DEI is why we have curb cuts.
Mm-hmm.
DEI is why we have the ADA. Some of this landmark legislation.
Well,
That
we even have signage,
exactly.
all of that.
Yep.
Your message around New Disabled South emphasizes the need to build coalition first throughout the state.
Yep.
And why was that the number one mission?
Because one of the principles of disability justice is interdependence. And there has been a history in our disability rights movement of focusing on independence, because our community was often institutionalized. If I was born in the 50s or 60s, I probably would have been thrown in an institution. So independence was really critical, but we've been moving in the last 20 years toward interdependence. And so I know, in order for us to achieve liberation, and that's not just disabled liberation, that's every marginalized group. It's critical for us to work together. So coalition as the foundation for our organization was critical.
If you're just joining us, I am in conversation with Dom Kelly. He's the co-founder, president, and CEO of New Disabled South. And their mission, it's pretty clear here. It's a South where liberation and justice for all disabled people is achievable. So let's talk about the South, because you've mentioned this now a few times, and someone listening may say, well, are there some unique circumstances or issues that you all are focusing on because you feel like it's very prevalent in the South here?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, the South has the highest population of disabled people out of anywhere in the country. So
Really?
1/3 of all disabled people in the U.S. live in the South.
I'm curious, Don, someone listening may say, well, where can I fact check that?
Google that, and
There
you'll
you go.
find
The good old G word.
Yeah, you will find numerous reports on it. And the majority of that population are Black and brown folks. The South has, as we all know, the history of Jim Crow, slavery, eugenics. All of that plays into the realities that disabled folks, especially multiply marginalized disabled folks, face today. But highest poverty rates in the country are in the South. 7 out of the 10 states that have an expanded Medicaid are in the South. We have waiting lists of people waiting for in-home care. The highest waiting lists are in the South.
All facts, Dom.
All facts.
So for folks listening, these are all facts.
Fact check me.
It.
Fact
Yes.
check me. 800,000 people in this country waiting for in-home care on waiting lists, sometimes a decade or longer. 75% of them are here in the South. So our community faces the disproportionate impacts of policy choices, of systemic ableism here in the South and elsewhere in this country.
There have been disability justice movements elsewhere in the country, and I'm just curious, have you all looked at those movements? Have they somehow been a template, or are you all mirroring your work?
Yeah, we have. I have been fortunate enough to learn from people who have done this work before me all over the country. So much of this is based on what's worked for our community and organizers in the DJ movement for a long time. One of the ways in particular is right now we're working on figuring out how do we build grassroots infrastructure for what are called care webs. And that's people delivering care to each other rather than waiting for Medicaid or our government to give them the kind of care that they deserve. That's been a really successful project in areas like the Bay Area. So we're figuring out how do we do that in an area in a area like the South. Care webs.
Okay.
Yeah. So like rather than me waiting for the government to say you get 5 hours a week of care, how can I connect with another person who needs care and give care to each other. We're trying to figure out how to operationalize that and build the infrastructure to make that sustainable, a new system where folks aren't waiting and waiting for years for the government to give them care that they deserve.
I have a listener who has a question. Does your guest know anything about these types of advocacy groups for indigenous populations out west? I don't know if you know that. But.
I know of a bunch of advocacy groups for indigenous communities all over the country, and we work with some of them.
All right, and you'll tell me, and I'll email this listener back.
Sure.
Again, there's another population that folks may not think about when it comes to the disabled. So even this question from this listener here, so how important are these collaborations, and who are some of the partners that you all are going to be working with or are already working with?
It's critical. Our organization is focused on cross-movement collaboration and cross-movement solidarity. So we believe that every issue is a disability justice issue because disabled people live in every community. So we were involved with the Cop City Vote campaign to get the issue of Cop City on the ballot here in Atlanta. We worked and continue to work with Working Families Party, Movement for Black Lives. We've worked with National Domestic Workers Alliance, climate groups, repro groups, across all different issues.
You mentioned climate. Let's talk about that for a moment, because again, we've done segments where we look at several of these quality of life issues and how they specifically intersect with different populations. So when you talk about climate and the disabled population, what do you want folks to know about that?
That disabled people are significantly more likely to die in weather emergencies than non-disabled people, especially folks who live on the coast in areas where we have to evacuate from hurricanes and other storm systems. We are almost certainly not involved in planning for disasters. And during last year's hurricane season, when we saw those two really big storms, disabled people were displaced. They lost their homes. We actually raised and sent out $300,000 worth of $150 and $300 payments to over 1,000 disabled people across the South just to get cash in their pockets to get medication or food or whatever they needed. And that's the kind of grassroots mutual aid kind of work that we try to do in those moments, but we can't do it at scale. Disabled people die in these situations as climate change continues to impact, especially our region.
I feel like that's a whole nother segment. And thank you, Dom, for doing that for those individuals, those households. How are you all funded?
We receive probably 85% foundation funding. And
any federal?
We receive no federal grants, no state. I won't take government money. It is an intentional choice.
Why?
I would rather fight the government, advocate
Can't you fight them with their own money?
We could.
It's been done before.
But, I've got a lot of friends in this work who will say, listen, I get a government grant. I can't say this, but y'all can say this. So we get to be that messenger. So I like being in that role.
That's so with foundations. Do you all have, or do you have any concerns now as a leader of an organization, even if you get your funding from a foundation, but they may get funding from the federal level, but perhaps they're having to change their mission or just go on the web and delete certain words like diversity, equity, inclusion, black, whatever,
Oh, yeah. I have lots of concerns about it. Thankfully, almost all of our funders that I could think of are folks who are standing firm right now in this, and they're not changing. But yeah, it's real. I could see the Trump administration going after the big progressive funders, and they're the ones who fund us. But taking it a day at a time, I can't lose sleep over it.
Listen, if you are able to help. You said $300,000. I mean, Dom, come on, that is to be acknowledged.
We've got a 25-person staff across the South, and we're doing well right now.
I have a listener who says this is great to hear. How involved are young folks now? That's my language, young folks. So now, young folks, that could be anybody under 65, but also I think in this circumstance we're talking about probably maybe 18 to 35. Is this also part of a youth movement too that you're hoping to build coalition with?
It is. I would say the majority of folks in our base, in our community, are younger folks who have been politicized around disability, who have seen the pandemic continue to disable people long term, who have grown up in this world where we have pandemics and where we have school shootings, and they've seen inaccessibility and they're learning about neurodivergence. That is the majority of our communities. So that is really a critical piece of what we're doing, is building a younger generation. I'm a millennial, but like millennial, Gen X, and younger mostly of disabled people.
Thank you for putting Gen Xers.
Gen X is my favorite generation.
With the young folks. Say that again, Don.
Gen X is my favorite generation.
Are you listening, Daniel? Producer Daniel, you're the first person to say that on this program, so you're going to make sure you can come back anytime you want. But let's talk about legislative work here, too, because it has taken legislation to get changes, as you're well aware of. What's left to be done? What are those key legislative, I guess, points that you guys got to aspire to get?
Yeah,
whether it's state or federal.
Right. I mean, first of all, the ADA was landmark. The Americans with Disability Act was landmark legislation, but we always say it's the floor, not the ceiling. So it is the bare minimum, but we have to do so much more to build a culture and society where accessibility is just a part of that. Even more than that, like, we still have in this country, it is legal to pay disabled people pennies per hour, subminimum wage. Georgia just passed a bill to do away with that, thankfully. But at the federal level, it's still legal. We want to see that. We want to see asset limits for disability benefits go away or be raised so that disabled people can actually save for retirement. There's all sorts of things. But even beyond legislative, we're really focused on how do we build something new outside of these systems, because while they're life-saving and critical, they also continue to oppress people, keep them in poverty. So what can we build outside of that? So we're doing the inside strategy and the outside strategy as well.
Some years ago, we did a transit series. It was called Gridlock, What's Moving Atlanta. And we had all these interviews. We had people that were coming in. We went out and did interviews. And we included, disability advocates. And the guest that I had on said, when it comes to transit and mobility rules, disabled people, they figure, if there's a special van to go pick up people, that's it. But we know with technology and how everything is changing, as it relates to transit and mobility, what's also on your list as it relates to this area?
Oh, I mean, we need better public transit in general in the Atlanta area. I think Marna Mobility is a great resource, but it's not enough for the number of wheelchair users, people who cannot drive.
And the wait times can be long.
The wait times are awful. And I mean, there's just the infrastructure in our state in general is just not set up for disabled people, especially folks who live in rural areas who maybe don't have access to a vehicle at all, who don't have access to Uber. There's not even accessible Ubers in the city of Atlanta.
Have you all talked to the rideshare companies about better ways to, and what's the response been?
There's a willingness. It's not an urgency. And we need urgency. More and more people are becoming disabled every single year for various reasons, but in big part because of COVID. And so this is urgent. We need better infrastructure. We need better systems for disabled people. What
is, now with the new administration in Washington, what are the concerns that you all have, and what's at the list in terms of your advocacy work for that?
Top right now is Medicaid. We have been, really fighting against these Medicaid cuts in Congress for months. That's a big concern. Tens of millions of people could potentially lose their health insurance, and disabled people already are in the coverage gap for Medicaid, and adding work requirements, as they're called, is so harmful to disabled people, especially those who can't necessarily get a diagnosis. There's so many barriers to getting a diagnosis. That's a big concern. I mean, just in general, the attacks on any sort of DEI, DEIA initiatives, the changing of language, like attacks on race. I mean, that all impacts the disability community. So I mean, everything is a concern for us right now.
We have talked about transit and mobility. We've talked a little bit about housing and workforce development, but also I am curious in terms of, Dom, what work are you all in those intersections where maybe it's LGBTQ plus, or, we talked a little bit about the indigenous population, but you also are working towards including all the subgroups that we have in all of this.
Yeah.
Is there a group that you all are still trying to either find organizations to partner with, or you're looking to strengthen or even just begin in terms of doing advocacy work for and with?
Right now, I'd say we've pretty much found partners in almost every issue area you can think of. We did some work to try to stop some of the gender affirming care bans in Georgia and other southern states, because a lot of that language was used disability as justification to ban gender affirming care for trans youth. So we've partnered with trans and queer organizations. We've partnered with racial justice organizations. We're kind of really a critical part of our work that we do is to really build cross movement work, and that's been a big success for us, thankfully.
And Don, as we begin to wrap up, what has been, I guess, the learning curve for you as a leader here?
There have been a lot. I think the biggest for me is that I have learned how to show up for my community in a different way. I feel like I've always shown up for the disability community because that's what I've committed my life to. But in this position of, I guess, leadership, both as an organization and in our movement, I have learned how to be more in solidarity with folks who are like chronically ill, who have other disabilities that I don't have. And I've learned from those folks. And I think that has helped me in my leadership. Which
leads us to this final question. When we talk about this, that you all put on your website, this quote, collective liberation philosophy. Mm-hmm. And if someone listening throughout this conversation hasn't fully gotten it, what do you want them to know about that?
I want them to know that none of us are free until we're all free. Disabled people can't be free until Black folks are free, until Palestine's free, until queer people are free. That's what we're all about.
Dom Kelly is the co-founder, president, and CEO of the New Disabled South. Don, thank you for coming in and sharing your story and your advocacy work. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me.